trap against the Scandinavian defense, which begins with pawn to d5. After capturing, and when black's queen recaptures, we play knight to c3, attacking the queen. Black typically responds with queen to a5, a common move in opening theory. Now, we play knight to f3, inviting black to play bishop to g4, pinning our knight. A very common response. Here, we play pawn to h3, putting black in a decision-making spot. Black has two main options: retreat the bishop with bishop to h5, or capture our knight on f3. The most common reply is bishop to h5, in which case white pushes with pawn to g4, forcing the bishop back. White then develops further with bishop to g2, controlling a strong diagonal. However, if black chooses to capture the knight on f3 to disrupt our plans, we simply recapture with the queen. Now, our queen threatens the pawn on b7. To counter this, black often plays knight to c6, both blocking the queen's attack and preparing to castle queenside in the next moves. Now, we play bishop to b5, pinning black's knight with our bishop and threatening to capture it as well. The only natural move for black to defend the knight is by playing queen to b6, but this falls directly into our trap. Here, we play the powerful move knight to d5, attacking the queen. You might think black can simply capture the bishop. However, that's not possible because after black captures, we play knight takes c7. This move is a check, while also attacking both the queen and the rook, allowing us to win the queen easily. Since black cannot capture the bishop, the queen must remain defending the c7 pawn. The best move for black is to retreat with queen to a5. Now, we play the strong move pawn to b4, further trapping the queen. Black cannot capture the b4 pawn with the knight due to the pin from our bishop. Additionally, the queen has no good squares to move to, as it must continue defending the c7 pawn. If black tries to capture the bishop instead, we respond with knight takes c7, winning the queen again. We begin with knight to f3. After pawn to d5, we play pawn to e4, offering a gambit of our e4 pawn. If black captures, we respond with knight to g5, putting pressure on the position. Black typically replies with knight to f6, attempting to defend the pawn. Next, we play pawn to d3, attacking black's advanced pawn. If black captures on d3, we recapture with the bishop, activating it. The most common reply from black here is pawn to h6, attempting to drive away our knight. At this point, white's position looks well prepared for a trap. The knight and bishop are active, and the queen is aligned with black's queen, even though the bishop currently blocks the path. The key move to activate the trap is knight takes f7, forcing black to deal with the knight. This move attacks both the queen and the rook. If black responds with king takes f7, we play bishop to g6, delivering a check. This forces black's king to either move away or capture the bishop, leaving the queen exposed to a discovered check. On the next move, white easily wins the queen. We begin with the move knight to c3. If black responds with pawn to d5, we play pawn to e5. After black captures on e5, instead of recapturing, we gambit the pawn and play bishop to c4, developing a piece and setting up a trap. Interestingly, this trap can also start differently. Let's go back to the beginning. Instead of opening with knight to c3, we can start with pawn to e4. If black responds with pawn to d5, the Scandinavian defense, we then play knight to c3. After black captures on e4, we play bishop to c4. This leads us back to the same position via transposition. In this position, black often plays knight to f6, aiming to defend the e4 pawn while developing a piece. Here, we play pawn to d3. If black captures on d3, instead of recapturing the pawn, we continue with development by playing knight to f3. Surprisingly, the most common response from black here is pawn takes d3, as black gets greedy and attempts to collect as many pawns as possible. However, this move falls into a trap. At this point, we play bishop takes f7, delivering a check. After king takes f7, the black queen is left undefended. On the next move, we capture the queen, leaving white a full queen ahead and with a decisive advantage. We begin with e4. The third trap we'll explore involves the Englund Gambit, which starts with pawn to e5. If white captures the e5 pawn, black responds with bishop to c5, targeting the weak f2 pawn. After white plays knight to f3 to defend, black continues with pawn to d6, sacrificing another pawn. If white captures on d6, black sets a sneaky trap by playing knight to e7. Here's a pro tip. This trap is especially effective in online chess, particularly in blitz or bullet games. When you play knight to e7, you should do so quickly to make it appear like a pre-move or a mouse slip, giving the impression that black accidentally blundered the knight. If white takes the bait and captures the knight on e7, black responds with bishop takes f2, delivering a check. The white king has no choice but to capture the bishop, as there are no other legal moves. This leaves the queen on d1 undefended, and black follows up with queen takes d1, winning the queen. The game starts with pawn to d4 and knight to f6. White typically continues with pawn to c4, and black responds with pawn to e5, entering the Budapest Gambit. After white captures on e5, black plays knight to e4, aiming to regain the pawn and create threats. White usually develops with knight to f3, and here black plays the unexpected move pawn to b6. This setup is geared more towards advanced players, as the key trap requires white to notice a seemingly obvious move, queen to d5. This move attacks black's rook on a8 and the knight on e4 simultaneously, giving the impression that black is losing material immediately. Black proceeds with bishop to b7, attacking the queen on d5. Black seemingly sacrifices the bishop because after queen takes b7, black plays knight to c6. Both protecting the rook on a8 and setting up a trap to cage the white queen on b7. This subtle yet powerful trap shows why the Budapest Gambit is a weapon better suited for higher-rated players, as it requires precise calculation and understanding of the position. At this stage, the white queen has very few squares to move to. The only viable escape square is queen to a6, as it attempts to keep the queen safe. Black's plan is to play knight to c5 on the next move, which would immediately attack the queen on a6 while also covering the e6 square, effectively trapping the queen. Typically, white will play queen to a6 to avoid losing the queen immediately. However, instead of playing knight to c5 right away, it is crucial to remember an intermediate move, bishop to b4, delivering a check. If white blocks the check with bishop to d2, black then proceeds with knight to c5. Now the white queen has only one square left to escape, queen to b5, as all other squares are covered by black's pieces. At this point, black plays the critical move bishop takes d2, delivering a check. If white recaptures with knight takes d2, black continues with pawn to a6, trapping the white queen. This position highlights the coordination of black's two knights. One knight controls the squares a4 and b3, while the other controls c5 and d3. Together, they work with the pawn on a6, leaving the queen no escape. It's important to note that bishop takes d2 is a crucial step. If black were to play pawn to a6 immediately instead, it would be a mistake. White could sacrifice the queen on b4 by capturing the bishop. After knight takes queen on b4, white would regain some compensation, and the trap would fail. The game begins with pawn to d4 and pawn to d5. After pawn to c4, a very common queen's gambit, black responds with pawn to e5, known as the Albin Gambit. Most natural reply is white capture the e5 pawn, after which black plays pawn to d4, restricting white's development. This advanced pawn is particularly annoying for white, as it prevents normal development of pieces, such as knight to c3 or pawn to e3. To counter this, white often plays pawn to e3, aiming to remove black's advanced pawn and eliminate the doubled pawns on the e-file. Here, black responds with bishop to b4, delivering a check. White typically defends with bishop to d2, and black captures the e3 pawn, setting up a trap by seemingly giving away the bishop on b4. If white captures the bishop with bishop takes b4, black responds with pawn takes f2, delivering a check. If the king captures the pawn on f2, this leaves the queen undefended, allowing black to capture it on the next move. Thanks for watching. If you benefited from this video, then subscribe.